have now. And we may have some of you read excerpts since Jake's voice is with the allergies is a little weak. We may pass this around however you do it. So please join me in welcoming Jake Elias to Sojourners.
I won't take any time to make corrections. I was employed at AMBS for 31 years.
Oh, excuse me.
From 1977 till 2008. And from 2001 till 2011, we were also pastor. I was also a pastor in Kokomo. So I overlapped and did pastoring as well as teaching at the seminary. It was relatively easy, at least if you don't take this very seriously. I hope that people realize I wouldn't. I did take it very seriously. But I always introduced myself to new students coming in at AMBS by my name, and I said, I'm a pastor. I teach Bible here at AMBS. So it's my identity, sense of identity. That's what people have also said to me, that they remember how I introduced myself to them. Well, if you would mind, how many of you have a copy of the book with you? Okay. Well, pass them around.
All right.
And distribute them so that we have access to them. My voice is not yet recovered from one day or a day and a half of laryngitis. I could hardly speak. I spoke in whispers. And it was because I spent a whole day in the heat trying to get something done in our backyard and front yard. And that's at least my explanation.
Here. Oh, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Hopefully I won't spill it. It's not light.
Developments in one's life don't always follow a predictable pattern. I would have never expected that I'd be teaching at seminary. I grew up in Saskatchewan, had a very conservative background in a Mennonite church called Berstaller, where education beyond 8th grade was frowned on. It would be better if you didn't have spend all that time to get 8 grades of education. And so I declared my intention very early, and from one step to another, I proceeded to a bachelor's degree at University of Saskatchewan, a Master of Divinity at AMBS, then a Doctor of Theology in Toronto School of Theology. So that was not a predicted pattern. My parents were always very supportive. I praise God for them and have been blessed by that openness. Dorothy Word came into our horizon of acquaintance in 2001. Lillian and I started as co-pastors at Parkview Mennonite Church in Kokomo. That's a 2-hour drive south of here. And she moved from Parkview, from Kokomo to Fort Wayne 3 years after we came there. She wanted to be closer to her family in Fort Wayne. She grew up in Fort Wayne. And the Fairhaven Mennonite Church was being established in the 1950s. And she was a child in the neighborhood close to where they were going to establish a building. And the people who were establishing the congregation went out to canvass the neighborhood and to meet children and others to invite them to join a vacation Bible school. Well, Dorothy did. She stayed, and she stayed. She went from she became a member of Fairhaven Mennonite Church, a charter member. She then went on to Goshen College when she had finished high school. It was at Goshen College for only 1 year of an intended total 4-year period at Goshen College. And more about that later. Became acquainted with her, as I said, at Parkview Mennonite Church, where she was very active in children's ministry. Part of what we did during our time at Parkview was also do some of the neighborhood canvassing that led to Dorothy becoming part of a church, part of a congregation, a Mennonite congregation. And Dorothy was heart and soul involved with that in a community night ministry. A lot of the children were biracial. But a few of those were the children of one woman who had a white woman, a number of partners over the years, all of them African-American. And so there was a crew of about 7 of those children in our program. It was just a delight to work with them. Part of what we did in our work with the children was we encouraged people in the congregation to pick them up because they often didn't have rides. And so we picked them up ourselves, and also others did as well. And some of these children came from rather impoverished situations. And what we did was have a meal right at the beginning of our time together. Are you able to hear me?
No.
I don't have much more voice. I just broke into my thought pattern. We had a meal together, and the adult members of our church were the ones that would sit beside or between the children, who often did not have the best of manners and didn't know exactly how to behave in each other's presence and in the presence of adults. And after a meal, we moved over into the worship area and sang. We did that by singing. We will follow. We will follow. We will follow Jesus. I don't know if that's in the repertoire here at College Mennonite. I'm assuming it is. After that entry into the worship area and some stories and some more singing, they had teaching on a topic of the day. And following that, recreation. They enjoyed time together in the back area behind our church. That was part of our background with Dorothy. 2004, she reported to us that she wanted to move from Kokomo to Fort Wayne. As I've said, is where she came from. She had, in the meantime, having been a charter member of the Fairhaven Mennonite Church, and having finished college, he started teaching in Wayne, Evansville, various other places. Evansville, Indiana was the longest period of time. And then she moved to Kokomo for her first stage of retirement. I'd like to have us get into the story about her role with Goshen College, her experience of Goshen College. If you have a book accessible to you, page 73. And I've asked Mark to do some reading so I can save my voice. Page 73. On page 73, the paragraph which begins by saying the pro-diversity stance, that's paragraph 3. Till the end of that page.
The pro-diversity stance is quite a contrast to the Goshen College I experienced as one of the few African Americans on that campus in the 1950s. Some of the administrators, faculty, and staff I encountered were ambivalent at best, while others deemed the rebuffs slights, and insensitive remarks to be for my own good, saddling me with the double burden of coping with the offenses and the offenders. The good news is that most of the white students I had contact with were not ambivalent or hesitant about being friendly. However, when I left Goshen campus, I vowed never to return. But in the fall of 1997, my foremost friend from those college days, Grace Summers Whitehead, persuaded me to attend the ethnic fair at Goshen College. The fair was a festive celebration of diversity, an event unthinkable in my college days. As we drove into Goshen College, my eyes drank in the small town surroundings for the first time. As an African-American student in the 1950s, this town was off limits to me. Undeniably, the town and college have come a long way over the 42-year span from my freshman days to the summer of 1998. And the theme of my June Goshen College bulletin, Working at Racism, detailing the college's leadership and the town's cooperation, gives me cause to be cautiously optimistic about the future of race relations.
Later, a few years later, Dorothy was invited to be a speaker at an event that has to do with an anti-racism agenda. This was the event. Pass this around. Pass it around for a glance. So she lasted only 1 year. She decided to leave after 1 year. One of the people who endorsed this book was Grace Whitehead. If you have a copy of the book, you see the middle endorsement of the middle of the back page. Very painful experience for us to observe. After Dorothy died in 2020, November 1, 2020, that was of course, you will recognize that as COVID initial year. I called her son. He had always let any calls that I made go to voicemail. And he always returned letters unopened, returned to sender. So there was just no openness on his part to have me communicate with him about his mother. So the morning after she died, I called him and I introduced myself, and I said, I asked him by name, find his name in the book. His name is Bryce. Bryce, you have to call me. Your mother died last night. You hear me? Mother died last night. Minutes later, the call came. And there were two components in that communication. One was a brief thank you for the ways in which Lily and I cared for her over the years. And then also, and this was hurtful, he said, I don't want anything to do with any end of life matter. So there's something very painful in the background. Anyway, that started us in the adventure of caring for her. I had the signing authority financially. Lily and I made all the decisions together. And later I was legal guardian. But I needed to have some protection because if the son were to be vindictive, there could have been some charges laid, and I needed some evidence to from Waterford Crossing, we transferred her to Golden Living in Elkhart. From Golden Living, we transferred here to what is now called Laurels of Goshen. Here in the Goshen area, it was at that time called Greenhouse Village of Goshen, where she lived for the last 3 years of her life. So then, after she died, our relationship with her and our activities related to her became different. At first, of course, there was grief. There was nobody in the family that took care of the normal things that family members do when a parent dies. There was no pastor. Had gotten angry also with some pastors, and so the paranoid, delusional kind of attitude and posture, which was very hard to see. That's a brief introduction to what preceded it. I had to then decide what do I do with the articles. On page 5, describes the process. During one of our visits, Dorothy was trying to get the words out. She couldn't quite do so. And she was pointing to the filing cabinets there in the corner, or across from where we were sitting. I could tell. She wanted us to see what was in that filing cabinet. And there was a stack of newspaper columns this high. Articles she had begun to write when she was in Evansville. And she wrote in the Kokomo Tribune 2004, 8 years. And when she moved to Fort Wayne, she also did some. And it's for the Journal Gazette articles that she gave her columns the title, Dorothy's Word. So I just borrowed that as a subtitle for the book. And of course, the title, you know where that comes from. The Dream Lives On. After Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, one of the daughters said, the dreamer was killed. They killed the dreamer, but the dream lives on. That was the reason for the title. I wanted to have some kind of official recognition in Evansville and Kokomo and Fort Wayne of Dorothy's roles in those places. The teacher, the retiree there, and the last case as having grown up there and having gotten her education there. And I urged the Kokomo Tribune, the Evansville paper, and the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette to request a review copy of the book. Journal Gazette, Fort Wayne did. The others did not. I was kind of very disappointed. So it's a full-page review that the Fort Wayne paper did of this book. I can leave it here somewhere. And note, I will have you notice how this is the writer was Keith Elshert. I don't know. He's the copy editor of the Journal Gazette's editorial page. Sprinkled throughout Word's writing, we learn snippets about her life in Fort Wayne and beyond. She grew up on Strathmore Street. She shared a February 12th birthday with Abraham Lincoln. There's a lot of things in common too. Both of us are honest and homely. That's the kind of humor she's sprinkled in occasionally. She encountered racism Northern style at Goshen College, Marion College, now Indiana Wesleyan, and in an ugly incident in Plymouth, Indiana. The Word offers no elaboration. But her columns more frequently focus on more broad themes, often drawn from the news of the day or a relevant historical anniversary. As a public school educator in the 1960s, Word was a frontline participant as Fort Wayne and the nation struggled to enact the vision set forth a decade earlier in Brown versus Board of Education. Her words are a searing indictment of the glacial pace of change. It was common, here he's quoting her, it's common for a segregated school to lack adequate school materials, to have no library, no cafeteria, and sometimes no gym. He wrote in 1997. Segregated schools often got the throwaways from the white schools, discarded books, out-of-date manuals, old typewriters, inadequate supplies. In 2004 piece, she painted a more broad portrait. One day I was invited to one of the Fort Wayne's all-white public schools. That school had a grassy schoolyard. Inside there were adequate supplies and books, a cafeteria, a shiny gym floor, a scoreboard that actually worked, murals on the wall in the brightly painted hall. Returning to my pallid basement classroom was painful and depressing. I'd witnessed firsthand the separation, that separate is not equal. You will notice that I'm going to pause here for questions just a moment. Notice that in the second page of a handout, I have a sketch. And then the first major section after the intro, you focus, I've pulled out the collection of articles. She had way more articles than I could have incorporated without losing the public interested in reading it. Most of what I have is in the MCUSA archives. That's where they're stored. And also they're digitized and stored in the AMBS library. You notice the themes are village, family, and school. And a copy of the book, you'll see those. Village, family, and school. And it's the school part of it that is called to attention in the book review of the Fort Wayne Gazette. After that brief overview over the village and school, family and school, I focused on the two themes. Okay. All right, is that working? I can even hear myself a little bit. Okay, thank you. Often in the literature about African Americans and their contribution in this nation, there's the insinuation that the African Americans like it that way. They don't have self-confidence to be leaders, to make major contributions to the welfare of the culture and the nation in which they live. So one thing that Dorothy does, and it's not stated directly as a goal, but the section under Heritage and Dream, I included articles about certain leaders in the African American community. I see there's some don't have a copy of the page. Oh, you do? Okay.
Jake, a little closer.
Okay, thank you. In order to communicate to her readers that African Americans have a contribution to make, she cited various African Americans who had made their contributions, their imprint on the culture in areas of science, in inventing, and business, et cetera, literature, writing hymns. She was very interested in athletics, and that comes through in various ways as well. So let's. I've gone over this quite rapidly. Do you want any questions at this point as to what I've talked about? Maybe what I've said was not clear enough for you to comprehend. Any questions? I'll have further input after that period.
I have a question, Jake. You mentioned you had to wrap up her one living heir. How her son after her death?
I was anticipating there might be difficulty. There was none. The legal guardianship arrangement was very useful in avoiding the traps that could have come had there been dispute among would-be heirs.
So what happened to her assets?
She had a will that was in some ways rather stupidly written, but that's part you need to pardon my expression there. Anyway, she had a will, and which was guided by the executors. I was not the executor. They were guided by her will to make a distribution according to her wishes. If we could turn, please, to pages 78, 79 in the book. One of the people whose contribution in the area of science, medical science, she highlights is Dr. Charles Drew. So if you have a book close enough by where you can glance at it, I'll ask Mark to read on page 73. No, 78. Yep.
Whereabouts?
Oh, sorry.
Start down there.
From here to about here.
I got you. There have been some very productive.
78.
Yeah, the penultimate paragraph. There have been some very productive but not well-known African Americans who passed the torch and benefited people all around the world. Dr. Charles Drew was one of those torch passers. Dr. Drew was an African American doctor who, through his research on blood plasma in the 1930s and 40s, discovered that plasma had a longer shelf life than whole blood. With that knowledge, he set up blood bank programs. Drew headed up the emergency plasma program for England during World War II. When the U.S. entered the war, Drew was chosen to head the National Blood Bank program, later called the American Red Cross Blood Bank. He and his associates developed standardized methods for banking blood and shipping plasma overseas. The plasma collected by blood banks for blood transfusions saved millions of lives during and also after the war. In the 1940s and during World War II, the Red Cross maintained segregated blood banks. Whites were given blood from white donors. African Americans were given blood from black donors. By the 1950s, the war was over, but segregation was not. That year, Dr. Drew was in a serious car accident. He needed blood. He was taken to a hospital, but he was not admitted because he was black. The man who established the first blood banks and saved many lives bled to death. He was 46 years old.
This was a story that appears one other time in the collection that I pulled together. If you turn to page 89, we don't necessarily read this, but I just want to let you know. This is an article that she calls "Death Often Comes Too Early to Those Who Achieve Greatness." And here she tells the story also about Dr. Drew. And at that point, I began to sense that there was some difference of opinion. And there's an editor's note on page 90 at the bottom. I have not consistently fact-checked Dorothy's writings. In this case, I did. And I discovered that apparently what she says about how Dr. Charles Richard Drew died relies on hearsay. A biographical overview published in the National Library of Medicine under the Charles R. Drew Papers attempts to set the record straight. Drew died on April 1, 1950 in Burlington, North Carolina, from injuries sustained in a car accident while en route to a conference. Despite the prompt and consistent care he received from the white physicians at a nearby hospital, he was too badly injured to survive. Drew's tragic death generated a persistent myth that he died because he was denied admission to the White Hospital or was denied a transfusion. But such stories have been debunked repeatedly. Though he died prematurely, Drew left a substantial legacy embodied in his blood bank work, and especially in the graduates of the Howard University School of Medicine. So this indicates there are some times when the hearsay is prejudicial. And what Dorothy had done is record some of the observations that were part of the hearsay. And unfortunately, that was left there. But I followed up in trying to ascertain whether that was deemed to be valid or truthful. If you turn to the handout sheet under Heritage. There's a Jackie Robinson story about how he had to fight for recognition. And that's, I won't read it, but if you get a copy of the book, read the highlighted page numbers there. And I don't know if you ever heard the expression, now that's the real McCoy. The middle of the page of my list, Elijah McCoy, who was a mechanical engineer, an African-American, who invented self-lubricating devices for trains and so on. And that gained his invention became so well known, and that people always said, no, I don't want some copy of that. I want to get the real McCoy. That's the history behind, the story behind that saying. The I don't know if any of you have pacemakers. Otis Boykin, just below the middle of the list, is an electrical engineer. He invented the pacemaker, and she makes a point of describing that at page 93. I'll just briefly turn there, please. Just below the middle. Inventor Otis Boykin was an electronics scientist who had 26 patents. One of his 26 inventions was the electrical resistor used in many computers, radios, television sets, and other electronically controlled devices, like guided missiles. But Boykin's best-known invention, the control unit for an artificial heart stimulator, is also called a pacemaker. This device is inserted into the body to deliver small, regular shocks to stimulate the heart to beat in a regular, normal rhythm. Pacemakers. How many? Yeah, I was going to ask that. How many of you have pacemakers?
Well, not as much as we thought.
Thank you. Well, now let's turn also to the section that I call dream. And just one or two instances of that. There are a lot more. And I'm just skimming the surface for some of these. If you turn to where it says Mary McLeod Bethune, page 99.
Let me read it.
Here to the end of the page.
All right. Mary McLeod Bethune, daughter of former enslaved people, was 9 years old when she dreamed of getting an education. And it happened at Miss Wilson's one-room school in Maysville, South Carolina. Later, Mary McLeod Bethune dreamed of being a missionary to Africa. That dream was denied by the mission board of Moody Bible Institute of Chicago. Black people, they informed her, could not be missionaries in Africa. Recovering from that harsh rejection, Bethune moved to another dream, the dream of having her very own school. In 1904, with incredible determination and hard work, with 5 little girls and $1.50, Bethune transformed a Daytona dump site into the educational and industrial school for Negro girls. Over the years, her school developed into an accredited high school and then into a college. The Board of Education of the Methodist Episcopal Church, now the United Methodist Church, also had a dream to merge their school, Cookman College, with Bethune School to form the Bethune-Cookman College. The dream continues alive and well. Today, Bethune-Cookman College, located in Daytona Beach, Florida, has an enrollment of over 2,300 and offers degrees in 36 areas of study.
Thank you. Are we impressed? Anyway, she has stories like that, and there are many, numerous others. Just a very personal side view. During the years after she died, and after I decided, and that's chronicled in the first chapter, decided to try to gather a collection of these articles into a book. I realized that I needed to increase my knowledge of African American life and history. I grew up in Saskatchewan, Canada. There were not very many African Americans there. When we first moved to Elkhart to study at the seminary, and Lillian was a student here at Goshen College, I was a student at seminary. In 1965, we had an apartment across the street from the campus, across the street from the seminary campus, owned by an African-American couple. So we had an African-American landlord and landlady, as it were. And our children, we had then had Laurel, who's now living in Australia, and Morlin was born shortly after we moved there. Laurel was deeply engaged with this couple. And she was always, we were in the basement apartment, she was always treading up the stairs to say hello to the people there. And our second child was born during the time we were in that apartment. And we just thought we needed more space. So we moved into a seminary campus housing. But then we were invited to come back to the home from where we had lived. And I remember well, at that point, Laurel ran toward the handler, his name is Montgomery, threw herself onto his lap and looked up at her and said, at him and said, "Mr. Montgomery, you're black." And it was true. She had not noticed. She had not noticed that a major reality that all of us would realize is quite easy to make. The bottom of page, the introductory page, I list some of the articles, some of the books that I read in the aftermath of doing this research. One of which is Richard Dawson with Richard Glaubman. Life is So Good. Subtitle, One Man's Extraordinary Journey Through the 20th Century and How He Learned to Read at age 98. And this is a book he then wrote, and Richard Glaubman helped him to write it. He was born at the end of the 19th century. He died in the beginning of the 21st. So his life spanned those 3 centuries, beginning and during and end. And the title he called is Life is So Good. Given how much pain he had experienced as an African-American slave, it is striking that he has such a positive attitude. Another book that I strongly recommend, and maybe some of you have read it, Isabel Wilkerson, Caste is the title. The Origins of Our Discontents. Isabel Wilkerson is an African-American scholar. She had also written, before this, she had written the book, The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's great migration from the south to the north. A very moving and educational kind of read for me. Could it just, yes.
There's a movie that just came out probably about 2 months ago called Origin, and it's on the life of Isabel Wilkerson. She was sort of stalled doing reporting types of things after having written The Warmth of Other Springs, and she was encouraged to write another book, and that's when she came up with Caste. And I think we saw it at a theater up in Michigan. But I may encourage the library to get a DVD, the Goshen Public Library. They do that. But it's a very interesting, it was produced, a filmmaker, a black filmmaker from LA, Ava DuVernay is the director of the film.
Thank you. Yeah, there are a lot of excellent studies, many of them done by African-American writers.
I would just say a word about what Jake has done here is that all of this material would have been archived someplace, so no one would have any access to it. And Jake has taken time to go through and sort through all of those articles that she wrote. And he not only does that, but he also reflects about the articles as he edited them. Mm-hmm. He didn't edit the article, but he edited by talking about what the article said. Yeah. And I think that, Jake, you've done a very good thing, and I commend you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, what would these books out here? You got 13. What's the senior discount price, Jake?
The normal price is $15, but the senior discount is $16. No.
Yeah, it's more than fair. Yes, we want for less than fair.
Bookstore, that's the price they ask. I had an offer for the first for the first batch that I've been distributing, but no, that supply is ending. So the full rate is $15. If any of you want it, just put it here somewhere, some of that you trust.
Yeah.
I'm not going to watch what you put down.
All right. Well, thank you, Jake, for addressing us on this remarkable book you've written.
Enjoy the book. I did not. I'm not planning to accept any royalties for this book. Any royalties that I receive will be passed on to two of the charitables that she supported in her lifetime. And these charitables know my intention, so they'll hold me accountable, I'm quite sure, but I will not get any of that. So don't worry about paying me too much, but you're paying me too much if you pay full rate for the book.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah.